And we are honored this time, and now we're going to do this in English, as I said in our intro, that we have from across the Atlantic Ocean, Professor Kevin Lagrandeur, all the way to New Mexico in the United States. Professor Lagrandeur, welcome to Voces de OdiseIA podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for telling me how to pronounce the Odyssea. Um, I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Professor. So basically, let's start from the beginning. Said a wise man once. Um, you 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 transitioned from being a medical student, if I read your your history, professional history, from being a medical student to becoming a prominent figure in AI ethics. Basically, how has this academic diversity influence your approach to the relationship between technology and the humanities?
Well, I think, the relationship between technology and the humanities is a very broad one, and I have a broad background, and so that's helped me understand things from both ends, the technological end and the humanitarian end or humanities end. I You're right. I started out pre-med and I was part of a vaccination corps in South America called Amigos de las Americas. And so I worked there when I was 18 and 19 as sort of um, with that organization, which is sort of like Doctors Without Borders. And I was going to be a physician, but things changed in my life. So I switched to the humanities. And then I retained an interest in science. So anyway, the two interests are both part of my history, and I'm fascinated by the crossover, which I think there's plenty of.
I see. With everything that is happening right now, for example, coming from the United States and the consequences it has had, for example, on the European Union itself, regarding the accelerated development of artificial intelligence. Um, and of course, you yourself being the director of research at the Global AI Ethics Institute, uh, what what do you consider to be the most urgent ethical challenges we face right now?
Yeah, I think that the biggest ethical challenge is that there's a battle right now between two groups who think about AI. They've been called the accelerationists and the safety people. I'm one of the safety-oriented people, and the accelerationists are people like the head of OpenAI or Elon Musk, who basically are in favor of going as fast as you can to develop AI. I think that that's a mistake because the big thing we need to pay attention to is establishing guardrails for safety about how we implement AI and how we develop AI. So that's a big general response. But if we're talking about particulars, I would say privacy is probably one of the top concerns now for people that are concerned about safety. And maybe another one would be, um, uh, well, privacy and also data bias, because everybody assumes that AI is very accurate, but it's not really, not yet. And it may never be if we don't get better data and data that is broader and better applied. And the tripping wire for that, of course, is that where do you get data? And data brokers to this point have not been very ethical. They simply scrape things off the internet, and it doesn't matter whether it's copyrighted or whether it's all about white people versus, somebody else, which has been a problem with the data bias so far.
Okay. Um, in your book, one of your books, called Androids and Intelligent Networks in Early Modern Literature and Culture, artificial slaves. Wow. Received an honorable mention in 2014. What parallels do you find between historical representations of technology and our current relationship with AI?
Well, I think the essence of that book is that first, AI is not a new idea. The idea goes all the way back to at least Aristotle, the idea of having an artificial slave, an artificial servant. And that's really what AI is. It's a servant that we don't have to pay, we don't have to feed, doesn't need sleep, perfect slave. And so that's the first thing. And of course, there are all these issues of morality and ethics buried in that too. But the other thing that was the point of my book is that we have a hard time finding a balance between knowing when to stop depending on our servants, whether they're human or artificial. This goes back to the philosopher Hegel, and his point was that there's a thing called a dialectic between slaves and their masters. Masters conquer us and enslave a people. Then they assign a lot of duties to those slaves. And as a result, Hegel says, the master gets weaker and the slaves get stronger until the dialectical process happens where the slaves then become the masters and the masters become the slaves. That's the process that I worry is happening with AI, because that's what you see when you look back all the way to Aristotle, that any slaves that are imagined or actually used, human or artificial, are seen as an offense against the gods, because you're trying to take too much power, more power than is natural for a human being. And that causes all kinds of dangers. And it's epitomized in certain myths, like the myth of Prometheus, for instance.
Yes, indeed.
Prometheus oversteps what is allowable for humans, offends the gods, and is punished for it. And that is what essentially has been the story for 2,000 years about making artificial slaves, is that whatever humans create with their ingenuity can come back and hurt them.
Indeed. You have spoken before the European Parliament about AI and employment. As a matter of fact, you were a guest to our research group regarding precisely the future of work. What was in the case of your intervention before the European Parliament, what was the main message you tried to convey to legislators about the future of work in the age of automation?
Well, my primary point when I talked to the European Parliament was the primary point of the book, Surviving the Machine Age, which is that, yes, AI does pose a danger to human jobs and human employment. But based on my study of past industrial revolutions, and there have been 3 of them besides this one, typically what happens in all 3 was that humans are put out of work by the new invention that causes the Industrial Revolution. And the unemployment and disruption to society is pretty big, but it only lasts about 20 years, about 1 generation. And then the people who grow up with that invention are able to make businesses with that new invention that far outnumber the jobs that have been destroyed by the new invention. So I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. It's going to ruin the job world for a lot of people, and probably for the next 15 years. And then there'll be this huge explosion of jobs that have to do with AI. And those jobs will be more numerous than the ones that are destroyed now. But the problem there is, what are we going to do for the next 15 years?
Exactly.
And so that's what I asked the European Union. This was actually specifically the Green Party that wanted to know about this, because they were considering the AI Act, which is now law in the European Union, and they were worried about the downsides. Personally, I've read the AI Act, and I think it's a very good set of regulations. I think if anything, it'll slow down the development of AI a little bit, which I think is a good thing. The accelerationists don't think that's a good thing because they want to develop it as fast as possible. But moving fast and breaking things is not a good way to make a better world.
That reminds me of the old slogan from Facebook, basically, break everything, if I remember correctly.
Move fast and break things. Yeah,
Exactly.
which is ironic because Google's big motto originally
Mhm.
was "Don't be evil." Well, they don't seem to care about that anymore.
Um, as a co-founder of the New York Post Human Research Group, which, to my surprise as well, Professor, there was this Professor Francesca Ferrando. I'm known from that side of the equation per se, and you're a co-founder as well as she is. How would you define two words from an academic context? Because we hear too much of this out there that is basically not serious at all. How would you define transhumanism and posthumanism for our audience, and why is it relevant in the current technological context?
Okay, so I have a really short article about that.
Mhm.
What is transhumanism, posthumanism?
Okay.
If you go to my website, which is on academia.edu, and just look for that title, how do we define posthumanism, transhumanism? Um, Basically, posthumanism extends from transhumanism, which is the study of how to incorporate um, intelligent technology into the human physique and mind, brain. And the theory is, for posthumanists, is that our continued development of digital technology, and if it's incorporated into the human um, itself, will cause us to become a different species. We'll become something more than human. We'll become post-human, and that's what the whole idea is about. There's also two different post-humanisms. There's the post-human, which is what I just talked about,
Mhm.
and it's a transformation of the species. And then the second is posthumanism, which has to do with what comes after humanism, which is the philosophical point of view that everything should be measured by the human being, So we're sort of the center of the universe,
Mhm.
and that we're the measure of all things. Um, that's been that whole philosophy has been exploded starting back in the 1960s by people like Jacques Derrida
Mhm.
and Lacan and other people. So after humanism became postmodernism, and then a branch of postmodernism has evolved in conjunction with technology, and that's posthumanism, and it's a philosophical point of view. So that, in a nutshell, is how I see transhumanism, posthumanism.
Excellent. Um, there's a talk you gave called gamification of art in the post-human era. This is quite a call for us at OdiseIA. For example, one of our current work groups is in fact working on the impact, for example, of generative AI for example, in intellectual property, for example, in artistic creation, and it points out to it basically because of your talk, how do you address how technology is transforming this artistic creation, and if you believe we are witnessing the birth of new art forms or the evolution of existing ones.
I think that's both. For instance, um, what I'm about to say would probably get me fired from any job in a humanist in an English department, but I quit teaching so I could do this stuff, so I don't care. But first of all, let's take video games. Video games have been influenced by the rise of AI, but at every stage, the increase, the sort of increase or sophistication of technology has affected video gaming. Video games are far more realistic now, for instance, and they also contain very sophisticated narratives, a lot of them. So I started teaching about 10, 15 years ago. I started teaching video games as literature because they are narratives, like literature is. And I know this sounds like heresy, but if you describe the narrative curve and then apply that to a video game like Fortnite, you can see it fits very well. So 200 years ago in the 18th century, novels, fictional novels were considered horrible things, fit only for women to read who have in their leisure time, because any serious writer wrote about the Bible or wrote poetry. And, it was considered low stuff, like pornography. And now 200 years later, it's a main form of art that we look back on. I think the same thing is going to happen with video games. 100 years from now, video games will be considered a high art form of the 21st century. So
Wow.
I think there's that in terms of art. There's an evolution caused by increasing digital sophistication and evolution of what we consider art, so with stuff that already exists. But then there's other types of art that have arisen, like when I wrote about artists who, starting about 15, 20 years ago, started using computer programming as an art. So they would program a computer to create art, and it wasn't actually the artist creating the piece of art, it was the artist creating the program that then created the piece of art. And that some of those artists have become very well known and are now in pretty famous museums like the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So I think there's that too, brand new types of art created by digital means. And I think another, obviously, step in that direction is AI now creating art. AI programs like Midjourney, you tell it what to create, you just describe it in a little paragraph, and it creates it. And then you have, a woolly mammoth walking down the middle of a city street, and it looks pretty realistic.
Exactly. Regarding this same question, Professor, it is like we could actually create a bumper sticker with this follow-up question is, what would Marshall McLuhan say about what you just said, basically? Would he agree?
I think the medium is the message. And I think in this case, he's right. So I guess my bumper sticker would be Marshall McLuhan was right.
All right.
Because AI is the medium now, the newest medium. And it is the message, because when people, especially people like me, see a video created by AI, I focus more on the process of creation by that AI than I do on the actual product. Although part of that is the implications of that product are big, because, like people have said, the big worry now is that AI can create misinformation and lies that look very realistic.
Okay. Professor, you've mentioned that AI can be both useful and dangerous in context, such as the fight against COVID-19 just a few years ago.
Mhm.
How can we balance the technological innovation with the protection of fundamental rights like privacy? Something quite is quite a theme here in the European Union, for example.
Well, that's the $1,000 question, isn't it? I think that what has to happen eventually is that we have to have a sort of cooperative network of regulations like we do with nuclear weapons. Um, we have to have international cooperation and international regulations. Right now, it's a hodgepodge, a mix. The European Union has created some very detailed regulations and that are pretty strict. The United States is behind in that game because the politics here are different. And then places like China have no rules whatsoever. The rule is whatever the authoritarian government says, then that's what they're going to do. Um, and they have a bad record of surveilling their own people. Um, the Han Chinese are surveilling the Uyghur Chinese, and they're very oppressed, and their freedoms are limited because of technology. So, we can't have this kind of thing happening. At some point, we're going to need to negotiate all of this. And I know people are very pessimistic about that right now, but I don't think they were very optimistic about negotiating nuclear treaties back in 1951. So things evolve, and I hope they evolve in the correct direction.
I see. Um, it was quite a surprise for me, Professor, that researching for these questions, I found that you're a founding member of the editorial board of AI and Ethics Journal, just like our co-founders, basically Idoia Salazar and Richard Benjamins. They are in the editorial board with you. That was a surprise. Um,
I didn't know that actually. There's about 20 or 30 people on the editorial board,
indeed,
and I haven't met them all. We have occasional meetings on Zoom, but not everybody shows up, and
I see.
you know, so forth. But
Indeed,
that's great to hear. I mean, like I said, obviously I think AI ethics is extremely important,
yes.
and so I'm happy that so many people from so many countries are on board with this kind of thing.
It did. And regarding your work at the AI and Ethics Journal, what trends do you observe in ethical research on artificial intelligence that should receive more public attention?
Hmm. Well, I don't think the public pays much attention to any of it, honestly.
Indeed.
I might have a warped view of this because I'm constantly publishing articles and talking like this, and I don't feel like anybody's listening.
Mhm.
My own people have asked me, this question before, and my answer is basically, I'm doing a lot of talking into a black hole. This is the way I feel, and nobody's listening. And they only will start listening when there's a big catastrophe. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way humans work. They just blithely go along a path
Mhm.
until the bottom drops out of that path. And then they go, maybe we should rethink this. So, for example, I also have a business as a consultant in AI ethics.
Yes.
A lot of people want to talk to me, but they don't want to pay me. Why? Because they're spending all their money developing product and pushing that product out, the AI product.
I see.
Um, and it's not worth it to a corporation to pay for something that doesn't clearly develop their bottom line, which is profit, and um, or guard them against losing a lot of profit. Well, right now they don't see a downside. They don't see that they're going to lose money, and they aren't going to make money from talking to people like me. that will happen, and it'll change once a disaster happens. And a disaster will happen, I predict, in the next 10 years, maybe even sooner. And then AI ethics will become more important.
And so you are saying right now, Professor, that it hasn't reached the pinnacle of what it should be. Is not as important right now, or considered important as it should be. Is that what you're saying, Professor?
Correct. And I think, yeah, I think the only thing the general public sees from the people I talk to
Yes.
is they see privacy is pretty obvious, privacy problems and data bias problems. And some of them, especially artists, resent um, their data being used for free to develop AI. But a lot of people, the news covers only certain topics, and they typically tend to cover, sensational topics like, oh, we have a brand new AI that does this, that can diagnose images taken of the human body, so find, say, tumors.
Mhm.
That is, it's great news, it's good news, but nobody talks about, say, how accurate is it? The general public only sees the headline. They don't think about the details. So, so I think the general public has only seen some big stuff like data privacy issues because it's in the newspapers. Um, and unless they try using it and get all kinds of mistakes, the hallucinations that AI does. For instance, I Googled myself when ChatGPT first came out to see I said, give me a paragraph bio of Kevin Lagrandeur, PhD. And it was complete, there were some big mistakes. It had me writing, um, this huge book that I never wrote. And it said I worked for the United Nations, which I don't. Yeah, I'm not nearly that important. So I thought, well, I wish I had written that book and that I had worked for the United Nations, but it just made those things up.
Ah, wow. Okay, Professor, your academic background. This is related to what we how we started this interview. Um, your academic background both it spans both economics and English literature. How has this interdisciplinary perspective influenced your analysis of the social impacts of technology?
Yeah, my backgrounds are actually in science and economics and English.
And
I have degrees in the last two, and I was a science major until my junior year in college.
mhm,
So yeah, so I think the answer to that is reflected in the two books I've written. The first one is about the social history of AI and how far back it goes and what the implications are, which is that we're endangered by our own ingenuity. And then the second book, I didn't write it. I put it together with James Hughes, and there are, I think, 10 or 12 of us in the book that wrote essays. That's an economics book
mhm.
because it's all about how AI will influence jobs and what kinds of things we can do to mitigate the negative um, results of AI on jobs. So, uh, so how has that influenced my outlook on AI? Was that the question? Am I
Yes,
answering the question?
your
Yeah.
analysis. That's right.
Well, and I think it's influenced me my background has influenced what I focus on. So, for instance, the second book, I was the one that wanted to focus um, on jobs and the economy because I think at the time, especially, it was an important consideration. I mean, in 2017 or 2016, when we were developing that book, AI was not actually a big thing.
Mhm.
So the book focuses on digital technology in general, but I think that book's even more pertinent now, especially the first chapter, which summarizes everything. Um, the stuff we predicted in 2016 is happening. People are losing jobs, or they're having to work with technology more. Like there are things like cobots, robots that are coworkers, or especially AI that's a coworker. I just upgraded or updated my software, my Microsoft Office software, and now suddenly I have an AI co-pilot that they call it the co-pilot to help me do things. I haven't tried it yet because I just updated yesterday, but I'm skeptical whether or not it's really going to be much value added to what I do. Um, I mainly write, so we'll see.
Okay. Precisely in your book, Surviving the Machine Age, you explore this transformation of human work. That was our first encounter was actually about the future work. What advice would you give to young professionals and not so young professionals preparing for an increasingly automated job market?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is that you start reading about AI so that you understand it and what it can do. Play around with it some, and be prepared when you go out on your first job interviews to be asked by your employers about AI and what your experience is with it and what you can do with it, because that's going to be an increasingly important thing in the future.
And Professor, one last question, and we'll go back in time to the mid 20th century, basically, to a German philosopher called Günther Anders. And of course, you know what I am going to ask you, basically. Could you explain to our audience, in your own words, what is this concept of Promethean shame?
Well, Promethean shame, as I see it,
Mhm.
is both the shame of not having um, certain technology or innovations and facing a sort of wall and not knowing how to get over it and being ashamed of your own capabilities. But it's also the shame afterwards of developing that technology and finding out that it's harmful or potentially harmful, and that you're liable to be punished for your ingenuity.
Indeed. Okay. Well, Professor, it's been a short but intense conversation, and we really appreciate it. Thank you for being here in Voces de OdiseIA. And this is your first and hopefully not your last time, Professor.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Professor.